recording. Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Med Mentors event on mental health. I'm so glad that you all were able to join us today or watch this recording later. Mental health is a super important topic for everyone, and we want to make sure and discuss it in the pre-med community as well as in the medical school community. We're going to be hearing from MS3s and MS4s throughout this event. And to get started, we'll just start with introducing our panel. My name is Juhi. I'm an MS1, and I will be moderating this event, as well as inserting my perspective where I see fit.
Hi everyone, my name is Melinda. I'm currently in MS3 at UCLA.
Hi, I'm Inanna, also in MS3 at UCLA.
How's it going? My name is Boris. I'm a MS4 or a leave of absence student, currently doing my master's in public health and with folks in epidemiology. And then I'll be coming back to finish my last year of medical school.
Wonderful, thank you all. Just for clarification, MS versus MS1 means like first year medical student, MS3 is a third year medical student, etc. Feel free to send any questions in the Q&A, and we will be able to answer them either throughout the event, or if you have specific questions for panelists, they can respond in the chat. But we're going to start off with some points of discussion, and then towards the end of the panel, we will have an open Q&A where you can leave questions in the chat and we can get to those. So thank you all for introducing yourselves and for serving as panelists for this important discussion. To start off, we would like to talk about identifying stressors. So the journey to becoming a physician is long and includes a lot of difficult times. So I would love to hear what you all think some of these stressors are, like starting from things you've encountered as pre-med students, as medical students in your gap years. These can either relate to the physician journey itself or just be general life stressors. And anyone can feel free to get started.
Hi, I'll start. I'm Inanna, third year med student. I think the number one stressor comes from comparison. So whatever step you're in, whether that's in undergrad, thinking about medicine, taking undergraduate pre-med classes, or out of school, studying for the MCAT, applying for medical school, going to interviews, in medical school, applying for all sorts of different things, including research or extracurriculars, or applying to residency. It's so easy to get stressed out by comparing yourself to others. The minute you think you're doing fine, and then you hear, oh my goodness, this other person is doing this, what? And everything you thought was okay about yourself before all of a sudden is just completely sounds terrible. So that's sort of my biggest stressor, oddly.
Yeah, no, I completely echo that. I think Inanna brought up a really good point about this comparison game. And in relation to that, I think my biggest stressor is probably race against time. So in med school, as you guys probably already have a conception, our like workload is like many times more than presumably what you would have as an undergrad. And so we really have to manage time optimally. But then that also, because of the comparison thing that Inanna mentioned, like a lot of times we see other people doing great things and we feel like we have to like maximally utilize every minute of the day. And sometimes if we fall short or if we procrastinate or something, we end up, kicking ourselves and blaming ourselves. And that kind of gets us into a cycle of, I suppose, like poor outlook on life, and sometimes it could also like derail us into like these like mental health illnesses. And so I think, yeah, like managing time really well, as well as what Nana said, not comparing yourself against other people are probably one of the most, two of the most important things that I have come to learn in med school.
Just to add to that, I mean, I completely agree with everything that's been said so far. The only thing I would add, I think, is sometimes the lack of information or not knowing what your next step is, or not knowing how to apply, or what's a good MCAT score, what's a good this, or whatever, what you need can be a source of stress. So I'm glad that everyone's present here and able to share some information, and that y'all here at UCLA are lucky to have great organizations such as like Med Mentors and stuff like that to ask a lot of questions, since that was a big stressor for me, coming from a smaller school that isn't really known to produce a lot of pre-meds. So just I think getting exposed and talking to as many different people can just be a way to alleviate that sort of stress, for sure.
Thank you all. I totally agree with all of these different stressors and think those are some really good categories. Comparison, racing against time, and not really knowing how to get to that next step. The process of becoming a physician can seem really daunting, and the way that the admissions process is currently set up, it's very difficult to get into medical school, and you have to do a lot before that in order to apply, and it can be very challenging to balance all of that. Kind of following up on identifying these stressors, when did you realize that it was important to prioritize your mental health and for that to be something that you consider?
I'll start again. I have been prioritizing my mental health for a long time, but that meant different things, I would say. So I had some counselor parents, and I grew up being told, process your emotions and it's okay to feel sad sometimes. But I didn't actively feel the need to do that until probably medical school. And there are a few very specific things I started doing year one that made the rest of medical school so much more doable. One was going to therapy as often as I could. We have the BWC, which is the Behavior Wellness Center, which basically is just, they have psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, sociologists, various different degrees of people who help with mental health. And you can kind of get set up with whoever matches what you need. And having those regular therapy sessions to sort of talk to someone who didn't know me, didn't have any stake in the game. I could just say whatever I felt and have some, perspective was really helpful. And I realized how necessary that was once I was in med school. And then also started meditating, which was funny. I'd kind of always been a little against meditation. My parents meditated, and I, thought it was hippie and all these different things, which I was trying to get away from. But I realized I needed something to just regulate, like the level of ups and downs I would have. Like oftentimes extremely excited, bored, that like excitement, stress bordering on happy euphoria that really then I could crash after. And just realizing I needed something to help me stabilize. And so that was actually after the first 2 or 3 blocks of first year of med school. And it really helped change the way I took on med school after that.
Yeah, for me, it was probably shortly after college. So I graduated in 2016, took 2 years of leave of absence or gap year, basically, before entering med school in 2018. And those 2 years were quite tumultuous, to say the least. And so I had to confront a lot of real life crises that I didn't really have to during college. And I was mature, my outlooks, my perspectives are all maturing as an adult. And I recognize myself to be someone who has relatively rapid shifts in mood, energy, as well as cognitive function. And in order to like stabilize that, I've come across a lot of different techniques and try to incorporate a lot of different techniques into my life. And I've converged on some that I can share with you guys later. But I think the pace of that incorporation definitely accelerated throughout med school as I began to realize, how much like distressful factors med school can bring into your life. And just in general, if we try to use the like approach of like suppression or ignoring it altogether, then it's only going to build up and not be a result. And so, yes, while I've tried to like work on my mental health since graduating from college, yeah, it was not until like I would say this past year when I've actively taken approaches, and it has been very effective. So I'll share it with you guys later.
Yeah, I think what both panelists have said is super important. Something I guess to add to that, I think, again, I was always aware and I did have like certain little techniques to like, exercising would help me feel better and all that. And I've been doing that even before medical school. And that was a really important thing for me in undergrad. But especially in medical school, it was a big transition moment for me. I had stayed home for college, lived at home for 4 years throughout college. And even though I had like traveled a lot and, studied abroad and lived by myself in many parts of the world and felt comfortable living alone, medical school was the first time that I would be, I guess, like permanently living alone without close contact with my family. And, that type of, it was a different type of isolation, even though I had classmates. So like getting adjusted to that took a little bit of time. And I realized that it's very easy to slip into almost like negative self-thoughts and conversations with yourself when you're kind of in a little bubble by yourself and you don't have anybody to discuss. And similar to what Inanna mentioned, I also gone to like the behavioral wellness center to seek out like counseling and therapy. And honestly, it's something that has really, really helped me grow as a person throughout these last 4 years of medical school and appreciate a lot of different things. And I've become healthier for it. And it is really commonplace for a lot of medical students to do it. So I just want to kind of emphasize that. And, people go for a lot of different reasons, for personal reasons, for difficult experiences on clinical rotations with patients, learning how to cope with seeing suffering and all those sort of things. So something very important. And yeah, I think I've tried to make a lot of improvements in regarding those sort of things since arriving to medical school. But yeah, I think kind of like what the panel said, medical school is a big shift in a lot of things. So it is important to start prioritizing even before if you can build those habits.
Thank you all so much for sharing. For me, it was my sophomore year of college where I really started thinking about my own mental health and taking actions to prioritize it. Before then, I hadn't even really considered mental health as like something that I needed to think about. But in my sophomore year, I started taking harder classes. My extracurricular involvements got more intense, and I started feeling anxious all the time. And at that time, I was very involved in mental health organizations as a way to help other people, but hadn't really thought about it as something to help myself. And I started going to therapy at that time. My college offered the student counseling center and offered like therapy to students through that. And then when I came to medical school, we have the BWC, the Behavioral Wellness Center, which also offers therapy sessions for medical students and different trainees. So I was very grateful to be able to continue seeing someone through that. We had a question in the chat that is kind of related to this conversation about stressors and mental health and things like that. The question is, how much of our environments can we contribute to these stressors?
I think we are a product of our environments a lot of times. To answer it very simply, yes, environment can contribute a lot. I think, like I mentioned, a big shift in my living situation environment that contribute to some stress. Again, transitioning from undergrad to medical school, or if somebody took a gap year back into schooling, those can all be incredibly stressful moments, because medical school is academically challenging, even though it's a lot of fun and rewarding at the same time. So I think finding a way to control your environment as much as possible is great. Kind of like what Inanna mentioned, finding some sort of practice or routine that works, from meditating to occasionally seeking out counseling. I'm a big believer of having some sort of schedule. I love waking up early, pre-COVID, go to the gym, go on an early morning run before our first class, do all these sort of things. And I think sticking to some sort of routine is a way to kind of control that environment and feel like it's less chaotic. And I think it does contribute to, or at least to me, it contributed to a lot of it was very grounding and helped alleviate a lot of stresses in medical school.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Boris said. So in a way, that question is really interesting, because I feel like, yeah, like it's because I guess we are a product of our environment, as Boris said. It's really difficult to decouple the concept of environment and yourself, in the sense that I think you can interpret the self as an open system, right? We're not a closed system, and so our minds, our bodies, basically everything is constantly in flux with the environment, and so we're influenced by the environment at all times, right? So from that sense, obviously, the environment matters a lot, but to what extent are you able to reinterpret what happens in your environment is what I think contributes to your mental stability or instability. So a good example is in medicine, right? We take care of patients, at least for the 3rd and 4th years at UCLA. We take care of patients on a daily basis. And there are very sick patients, or patients who are on their deathbed, pretty much. And it, for most of us, right, it impacts us a big deal. It makes us sort of contextualize our own experiences in the experiences of our patients and their suffering, right? So from that sense, of course, this is gonna impact me a lot. And I'm sort of carrying on the burden of my patients almost. I mean, I think it varies by the individual, but if my patient is almost dying, especially if I've already created a relationship with that patient, then I'm obviously going to be really sad. But to what extent do you let that sadness affect you, and to what extent do you let that sadness become your own, or a part of you that kind of drives you almost crazy, right? You can always you can always be sympathetic and empathetic with people without that becoming your own burden. And I feel like that's where mental health comes in. That's where all these as Inanna and Boris mentioned, these mental health exercises also come in as well, which I'll share with you guys later. So yeah, so basically, yes, you are your own environment. You're in flux with your environment constantly, and but then you are the self that's in control of what sort of zaps you and what you perceive.
Sorry, I just want to chime in one more time. I just thought of something. I think also along the lines, like I said, of being able to control your environment as much as you can, and to some degree, obviously, clinical rotations get crazy and the hours are all hectic, and there's a lot of things that you can't control. But something that you can control is the social environment that you surround yourself in, having some, friend groups, families, stuff like that. I think as you get older, you get to pick and choose who you're going to be interacting with, especially in your free time. So really finding those groups of people that support you and kind of lift you up and aren't toxic is incredibly important. And unfortunately, there's going to be unpleasant or toxic individuals anywhere you go to med school or any career that you pursue, but to the best of your ability, kind of removing yourself from those situations if you have the opportunity, and going towards groups and gravitating towards individuals that really kind of vibe with you and speak to your ethos is incredibly important, and something that can be done and makes medical school a lot more enjoyable once you find those groups of people that you can really mesh with.
I agree with Boris, and I just want to add one more thing to this environment thing. I was applying for med school when I was home, like after 4 years of being out of undergrad. And while it was difficult not having access to sort of all the information, and there were so many things I didn't know, it was relaxing in the sense that I didn't have too many people to compare myself to. So I just did my thing. And then when I came to med school, I lived with another med student, and she was a great med student, great person, but so intense about med school and really good at what she did. But I was not good at not comparing myself to her. And so because of that, just because of that little environment, I was so stressed all the time. And now I live with a law student, and oh, those poor law students, they are so stressed. But I don't get stressed by her stress in any way because it's so separate from what I'm doing. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't live with a med student, or you should, because I have other med student colleagues who I like just get really excited about medicine with. As Boris was saying, kind of who you surround yourself with, but it does make a difference. And if you're the kind of person who struggles with comparison or just like trusting in what you're doing and your path, maybe, don't, when you're applying to med school, you don't have to talk about all of it with your other pre-med friends, or when you're in med school, you don't necessarily have to live with another med student. So just taking those environmental factors that are under your control into consideration.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we're talking about those social, like the social environment and those social relationships. To kind of sum up what Anana said and kind of add to it, setting boundaries is really important. It's important to have, like, you can have different kinds of friendships, different kinds of relationships with different kinds of people. One thing that worked for me, because I'm very prone to comparing myself to others and feeling like lesser than when that's not the case, is during my time in college, I wouldn't like compare my grades on tests or anything with any of my friends. Like, we just wouldn't talk about it. And then when I was applying to medical school, I just like had a rule with my other friends that were applying to medical school that we weren't going to talk about where we were applying to. We weren't going to compare our MCAT scores. And that really helped make it an experience that wasn't like so terrible, because I wasn't constantly thinking like, this person got into this school, but they rejected me. I was just focusing on my own application process.
There's one more thing I really want to add to this question. Echoing what Boris said about sort of like putting yourself between your emotions and your environment and controlling whatever your environment offers to you. I think that is absolutely really important. That is kind of like the principle for centeredness, right? If you want to be like a centered person, so to say, like someone who's tranquil, relatively peaceful, relatively unperturbed by their environment. There's a word that I really like called unfuckwithable. So like no one can fuck with you, basically. That is the essence of like someone who's really basically like reassured, very at peace with themselves. And that's a state, of course, that you want to achieve, that we all probably have not achieved, minus like a few saints here and there. But then at the same time, I think that's really important. Basically, reinterpreting an environment and casting like your own understanding of what's happening, and then kind of diffusing all the stress away from what you interpret environment to be, right? I think that's like absolutely very important, and in a way that is sort of controlling what's coming to you. But at the same time, I think another piece that's really important is to not be a control freak as well, in the sense that, we're like emotional beings, right? We respond to our environment, we react to them, and that's our biological nature. And so just like to give yourself that freedom to sometimes respond and react instantaneously, and then kind of observe your emotions, but then let those emotions kind of like wither away, is something like that mindfulness practice calls for. But I think that's something that's also really important. So in a way, they sound sort of contradictory, but I think they're actually like very much in sync with each other, in the sense that you can reinterpret. So the process of like controlling or reinterpreting your environment comes from understanding, like sort of looking at your emotions from a meta level perspective, understanding why, or trying to understand why you're having these emotions, and then kind of just let them pass via like this reinterpretation of your environment. Yeah, I think those are like some very like effective strategies that that Mindness calls for, that I would suggest people use.
These are all some wonderful strategies, and really like leads into the next section of this event really well, which is caring for our mental health. And I think all of us have discussed this in some capacity. So I think what I want to ask is, how has self-care and caring for your mental health looked during the COVID-19 pandemic?
I guess I can start off with this one, since my experience is a little bit different than the other panelists, just because I'm on this. COVID-19 overlapped with the end of my third year, or my clinical year, and then the beginning of the fourth year that I did before my master's. So between up until October, I was still doing clinical rotations. And then after that, since October, just like all the undergrads, I've been on Zoom University, hanging out in this little apartment in a little bubble. So the impacts on COVID have been a little bit different for me compared to some of the other medical students that are on clinical rotations. But again, I think similar, kind of echoing what we've already mentioned, I think I sought out, virtual behavioral wellness center appointments for counseling to talk about some of the stuff I was seeing while I was still on clinical rotations, surrounding COVID, and then also talking to somebody just regarding like identifying ways to kind of cope with stress and like anxiety and other health issues that were going on, and how COVID was impacting like family and stuff like that was incredibly useful. And then again, I think I can't stress this enough, and I know it sounds really cheesy, but having like a schedule, like a time you wake up, a time you go to bed, a time you're doing something, is very important when it feels like you're stuck at home all the time. So it's like there are moments when you kind of in the beginning, when all like these, stress, anxiety, maybe some depression were kind of kicking in, and it was really hard to get motivated to stay on top of things and do everything as like I was supposed to. And a lack of a strict schedule definitely kind of exacerbated those problems. And once I kind of went back to my roots per se of being very disciplined around certain things, that definitely helped a lot. So I think one of the best ways to manage, I think COVID stress at home, but also just stress in general throughout medical school and life, I think, is having some sort of schedule that can keep you in a good routine, hopefully, and then also scheduling in fun activities, things that are like for self-care. I think a lot of times when somebody says a schedule, we always think we have to be productive in that schedule every single moment. But I think actually scheduling in things that you enjoy, things that are important for your mental health, physical health, is really important. And unfortunately, medical students oftentimes don't schedule that part in and then get burnt out, regardless if it's COVID or not. So it sounds cheesy, but scheduling in like, okay, from this time to this time, I am exercising or not looking at my computer or talking to my grandma or something like that. So I think that's really important.
I would echo that. I even will like put in my little paper planner check boxes for the happy things I want to do, because we are addicted to our control and productivity as pre-meds and med students. And if I put it on my same to-do list with that reading or studying that case report, and there's like yoga, meditation, call mom, go for a run, it feels great. I have been in clinicals throughout most of COVID. So like I just got back from the hospital right now. I'm super jazzed about the surgeries I saw and got to participate in today. And because of that, I've had a lot more interaction than I think many people during COVID, especially on Zoom University or Zoom meetings or Zoom work or unemployment. A lot of my friends back home are unemployed or really struggling right now. And so I feel very lucky to get to go into the hospital and be working with patients, working with, other doctors and learning that way, but it's still lonelier. Third year of medical school is a lonelier time in that you don't interact with all of your cohort and classmates as much, and you don't have as much time to meet up with your friends. The activities that would have been scheduled for our classmates to get together are all canceled. And so you come back from the hospital and the combo of third year and COVID and being so busy is lonely. And so I've sort of dealt with that by various forms of balancing. I've tried anytime I have an hour off, I'm going to go see my one or two friends in my bubble, and then gotten burnt out with that and realized, oh, actually I need separate time to myself, and maybe I'll just have a FaceTime. But finding ways to connect, whether that's with your friends or, as cheesy as it sounds, with yourself, has helped me in this COVID time.
Yeah, so for me, COVID was a strugglesome time for sure. So I was dealing with school. Basically, it was right before we were scheduled for our step one, but our step one got punted because of the closure of the centers. I was also dealing with some family issues as well as a breakup. So personally, it was quite difficult. And also, obviously, the fact that the world is on fire and I am sort of not in any position, I do not have any power whatsoever to affect any change or to make the situation better, definitely made me feel helpless. So it was really hard. But I basically sort of, it was also like a very thought-provoking time in the sense that I was at home studying for STEP, but because our STEP got punted, I had a lot of time to myself to just think. And one of the things I did to, stabilize myself is I use this technique of contextualization. So disclaimer, this is not necessarily effective for everyone. It works for me very well. But basically what I was thinking is that, with COVID, the world is burning and a lot of people are in much dire situations than I am. In fact, I think I am definitely one of the more privileged people. In this time, such a chaotic time. I had a family to be with. I didn't have any financial troubles, so I was really blessed in that sense. So despite all my, whatever you call minor inconveniences, I was still suffering despite these minor inconveniences, and I try to contextualize my own inconveniences in the scope of this world that was, and a lot of people were having a lot worse than I was. And so in that sense, I think it made me feel almost like guilty or almost selfish to be indulging in my own negativities. And so I think I was able to more just willingly purge these negativities and come to a more stable state.
Thank you for sharing your perspectives on self-care during COVID. Juhi had to hop off for a second, so I'm going to be taking over until she gets back. So maybe we can think about, or if you guys are able to think about back when you were pre-meds, do you have any advice about prioritizing mental health specifically through challenging pre-med curriculum, or just throughout the medical school application cycle in general? I think we talked a little bit about it earlier, but if you have any other insights, it'd be really helpful.
I probably shouldn't speak first, but I'll go because they'll go after. I took 4 years off. I was not taking rigorous pre-med courses, or at least not all of them, when I was an undergrad. So I think that helped, one. But obviously, if that's not your plan, that's 100% okay too. But so I took my pre-med, most of my pre-med classes, or not most. I was a biology major. I had a lot of the pre-med classes done. I took organic chemistry and physics at my local community college after I was a school teacher and a conservation biologist and an ED scribe, and then decided to apply to med school. And that in itself, like that 4 years and career exploration, was how I would say I dealt with pre-med stress, in the sense that I didn't do the pre-med thing or the applying to med school thing until I was really sure. And obviously that's not for everyone, and 100% all the power to you if you're ready now, or if 1 year might be solid. But I think it's important to remember that you're never stuck to one timeline. You're never stuck to, oh my goodness, I must get through these pre-med courses plus studying for the MCAT and taking it plus applying to medical school while I'm a junior or senior in undergrad. It's absolutely okay to do that different ways. Just like when you're in med school, you're not stuck to a 4-year plan. And I feel that way with all things in life.
I will hop on because I did a different thing compared to Inanna. So I went straight through undergrad to medical school. So that was, for all the bad things about going to a CSU and not having a lot of access to resources and not knowing a lot about applying to med school and how that process goes and all that, there were also some benefits in the sense that since there isn't a lot of pre-med activity going on, there was a less, I guess, that classic pre-med competition and stress, which was nice. But again, pre-med classes are going to be challenging and demanding everywhere and all those sort of things. But I just kind of want to echo what Inanna mentioned, in the sense of she had a different timeline and took time off. So I had the plan for a long time that I was like, oh, I want to go straight through because I really want to go to medical school. And this is I already knew that for a long time in my life at that point. And things didn't go as smoothly as I would have wanted when the whole application process eventually, worked out and got in kind of late, but it's okay. But I think having that backup plan and being okay with, what, plans change, stuff doesn't always go as planned, and that's totally okay. If you are set on going to medical school and becoming a physician, one bump in the road, wherever it's at in the pathway of, a bad grade as a freshman or a bad MCAT score, or being rejected completely in your first round of medical school applications, it should not derail you from pursuing your dreams. If this is actually what you want to do, you're going to make it happen. You're going to take a unexpected gap year. Like I was planning on doing an unexpected gap year until literally the last second, and then it worked out. But that's totally okay. And I think going through that experience really opened my eyes that, wow, no matter how hard you prep or how hard you plan everything out to be perfect, sometimes life happens, stuff happens, right? And that's totally okay. So I think it's important to have backup plans and backup plans to backup plans, and that's so okay. And sometimes you do need a break and take a step back and figure everything out and sort it out. Just because somebody else is flying through and acing out all their classes and going to be applying in 4 years, that doesn't mean that's necessarily the correct path for you. And some people need a little bit of time to reflect and figure out what their priorities are before making that next step.
Yeah, I would highly advocate for taking some time off, especially if you're thinking about it. Life is just so short. I think, especially when you're young, trying to gather as many different perspectives as possible is so valuable, and just keep an open mind, right? I took 2 years off, and I I was working in a translational research lab at my undergrad institution. And although I I didn't depart very far from where I lived as an undergrad, just the shift in the tempo of everyday life, being immersed in sort of quote unquote real life, in a salaried job, really allowed me to see things beyond what I saw as a student. And I think that gain in perspective is really important. And that goes for anything, obviously. But I think it is definitely a categorical difference. I think for someone to have gone through some industrial experience, experience working in the industry or experience working in a lab, outside of the classroom setting. And and to like sort of like equip themselves with those experiences going into med school is so valuable. I think had I gone straight through to medicine, I think my outlook and my approach would have been a lot different. And I don't think I would be as happy as I am today, or I guess like as certain of what I want to do in the future.
So I'm going to chime in again. And this is not to sound like I'm trying to contradict what Melinda's saying, because everybody, like I said, everybody's unique. Everybody has their own story. You're crafting your own journey, right? I'll just say this, that sometimes people that want to go straight through and know that they want to do it and are passionate get a bad rap, or in the sense of, oh, you don't have perspective, or you don't know what real life is really like because you didn't take time off. And that's stuff that, you know, I heard from some fellow classmates that took time off and I didn't. That's stuff that I heard from attendings and doctors within the medical system here. They gave me a hard time and say that I was in the tunnel. I had no perspective. That, in my opinion, is BS, because you can have a lot of life experiences even if you go straight through. And it's it depends. Everybody's unique, right? Like people sometimes say like, oh, you need to go work a job to understand that sort of things. Like, okay, well, some people have been working since high school and throughout college and how to do that. So they have that perspective. Some people say, oh, you need to take time off so you can go travel. Well, sometimes people are able to fit that in as well. So it's like, just because some people do it, either way, either option, it doesn't mean that it's wrong to do it the other way. So, you're going to follow whatever you think feels right and what you need to do to be able to stay happy and stay true to yourself and like fulfill your mission. So, yeah, it's okay to go straight through as well. Like, you can gain perspective in a lot of different ways. So it just depends on the person.
Okay, just to respond to that. Sorry, not to be contentious or anything. I don't like, my previous stance is not to be prescriptive as in you have to like take years off in order to gain perspectives, in order to better know what you want to do in med school and beyond. But it was more from the perspective that, I think taking opening your being flexible to taking these time off can really open up your mind in ways that you may not imagine possible. And I feel like the current trend, okay, maybe not so much anymore, but there's still this like conception of a rush to go to med school, to graduate early, because we are in training for like way too long. We don't start earning until much later in life, right? And so while I understand that rush, I think gaining perspectives and also like just keeping an open mind to like what you could possibly be doing, not just in medicine, but outside and in relation to medicine, is something that you could really gain through 3 years off. So if you're thinking about it, I would definitely encourage it. If you think that's an absolute no for you, that's also fine.
Again, thank you for sharing these different perspectives. So this question coming up isn't on the agenda, but what are some ways that you can or have had to advocate for yourself in the professional world when you felt that your mental health was suffering?
I don't know if this is much, I guess this could maybe be considered advocating, but there's been a few moments, more than a few, but there's a few moments that I can really think of throughout my clinical year during as a third year and later on when I was doing that first half of fourth year before my MPH, that I had incredibly challenging cases that really, really hit home and, kind of emotionally were pretty devastating and really challenging. And seeking out there were sometimes that my team of attendings and residents that I was working with really were on top of it and like checking in with me and asking and like debriefing. And initially I kind of pushed back and I was like, no, I'm fine, I'm cool. And then I got home and then I did realize I was not cool when I was sitting by myself. And then taking up people on those offers when they want to talk to you and debrief regarding challenging situations in med school, regardless if it's with a patient, with classmates, studying, whatever it is, and being open to being a little bit vulnerable has proven to be really, really useful and really helpful. So then later on throughout the year, sometimes, again, it'd be a very challenging patient encounter for me for, again, personal reasons or whatever it is. And sometimes, attending a resident maybe doesn't resonate in the same way with that encounter, and actually kind of going a little bit out of your way to ask, like, hey, can we debrief about this or talk about this? Like, this was very challenging. So I guess it's advocating for yourself, and that you don't just like hop on to the next task in the hospital, but like trying to slow down and really process that and talk through. And many times, usually I've never had somebody not be receptive to that when you actually ask. Sometimes people just don't know that what you're going through or what you're thinking of and experiencing. So being willing to be vulnerable regarding your emotions, I think, is challenging, but ultimately really important, especially in medicine.
Okay. So this is kind of related to self-care. I guess this is a form of self-care. What are some of the ways that you like to avoid procrastinating and stressing yourself out even more? I can already imagine Boris is going to talk about his schedule, but do you have any other tips for that?
Just to clarify, this is how to not procrastinate?
Yeah.
My number one piece of advice that I use and give to others, it definitely doesn't work for everyone, but is to go to lectures. I think that's different with Zoom. Of course, it's not the same to be in person, seeing your classmates, seeing your professors, asking questions in real time, but being on a live Zoom does make you be a little more engaged. You can't 2 times speed it. You can't take a break and go get distracted for half an hour. And if you do have a question, you can ask it in real time. And then you're caught up. And I've had different forms of pushback with that. Some of my mentees will say, oh, but I just can't take in the information that quickly, which is totally valid. Few people can. Med school classes are so intense. They're basically a semester's worth of material packed into a week or so, sometimes even less. And so it is very dense, but even when you have to go back and refresh some information or learn it differently, by going to live lectures, classes, Zooms, whatever it was, by kind of doing things the day that they actually happened in real time, submitting those assignments on those days, doing the pre-readings, you end up doing it more efficiently. And I say that because when I took a little bit of time, maybe 10 minutes to preview what I was going to learn in the lecture, I could get so much more out of the lecture and then have so much less time I had to spend later relearning it. When I had to go find the files and see what applied to what, and being able to ask questions of my professors in real time, being able to apply it to whatever anatomy lab was, because a lot of different things will be coordinated. And so as soon as you start procrastinating, you procrastinate everything. And it's so easy to sort of just drop the ball somewhere. And by staying really on schedule with the medical curriculum, as silly as that sounds, I was able to not procrastinate and be a lot less stressed. Because the way I put it to some of my friends is, you're doing the same amount of work if you're doing it before versus later, but you're just enjoying it more. Because if you're not feeling behind and stressed, it's a lot easier to do the exact same work.
Preach. Inan and I have had many conversations when, again, there was a year difference before I took this gap year. When I was a second year and she was a first year and stuff like that, I was a lecture goer throughout the first 2 years of medical school. Probably I can count how many lectures I've missed on one hand in those 2 years. But I completely agree with what she says. And I think sometimes people will say, oh, I don't learn well through lecture. I like being able to pause and rewind and all that. And that's fair and that's true. I sometimes think that the amount of people in our class that claim that their learning style is that, like virtual learning versus in-person learning, is not congruent with what actually, I don't think it's actually true, but it's sometimes just convenient because people don't want to go to class, don't want to wake up, whatever it might be. So I think, again, like was joked before, again, it goes back to having like some sort of schedule and routine. If going to class works, that's fine. If you don't want to go to class, but you have a routine of watching those videos, that works too. But I think having that like discipline and kind of routine of when are you consuming information, when are you like studying and practicing, when are you studying on your own and stuff like that is really important. And then also it's nice, depending on if it's your study style or if you enjoy this, having like some sort of study buddy, or even if you're not studying together, having somebody that can keep you accountable and kind of check in on like, hey, did you do this? Did you not do this? Like, we got to do this. Don't forget to do this. I thought that was incredibly useful, especially when preparing for like our first board exam. I had like two study partners that we were always, keeping each other in check for both like studying really hard, but also knowing that like, hey, we need to peace out and have a little bit of fun and like recenter ourselves and check in, do a little mental health work before we get back into studying. So I think both of those are incredibly important. But eventually everybody procrastinates for something. So it's okay if that happens, as long as you just kind of pick yourself up and then kind of restart and keep going.
Yeah, so for me, I employ this like 5-minute rule. So you guys might have heard of this, but basically when I'm feeling in the mood for procrastination, doing anything but the tasks I have to accomplish, I basically set my timer to 5 minutes and like engage that task without distraction for 5 whole minutes. And I can just stop after 5 minutes. I can do whatever I wish. But then usually like once you start, you kind of get into the rhythm of it and you want to continue. That is the case for like most tasks, I think, right? Once you kind of overcome that activation energy, it's a smooth sail from there. So I think you should try that out. And it's only 5 minutes. If it doesn't work, then oh well.
Going off of what Melinda said, that's an excellent study tip. I like maybe people have heard of this. It's called the Pomodoro Technique. There's a lot of variations how you do it, but it's a similar like timer-based study strategy where you set a timer for about 20 minutes at a time and you do 0 distractions. You're doing a task for 20 minutes and then you're followed off by a 5-minute break and then you do another 20. And I think you do that for 3 cycles of that. And then you're rewarded with like a 15-minute break. And then and during breaks, you're not supposed to be doing anything productive. You kind of like peace out and you do something fun. I did this a lot during like the first 2 years of medical school, especially when we were studying for our board exams. And then during those 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I would literally get out and like walk around campus as much as I can or something like that, or go talk to a friend and then come back and do stuff. And I think that's it's a very efficient method, and you'll be surprised how much you can get done in those little chunks if you're really focused. A lot of times, I'll see friends like, oh man, I was studying for like 3 hours. I'm like, were you like, I saw you through the window what you were actually doing. Like, it wasn't that efficient. I was like, man, like I'd rather go hard, finish, and then go peace out and go like to the beach and play volleyball, pre-COVID. But so.
Thank you for this advice. This is actually really useful for me too as a first year. So we have a super quick question, last one in the chat. How do you control things that take longer than you scheduled, like studying, homework, meetings, etc.? I just to answer this in a few seconds, personally, when I'm scheduling things, I always schedule them in to take 15 to 30 minutes longer than I think they will. And then if they don't, I just use that time to relax. But if they do take that amount of time, it's okay. Panelists, do you have any other advice?
I would say everything takes longer than I think it is going to take, but not just by 15 minutes, more like by an hour or 5, especially when it comes to really difficult sort of medical school studying. And so my strategy for that was just being really thoughtful about the way I prioritize. And I recognize that rarely am I going to get to everything on my to-do list. And so I can sort of address that in, 2 main ways. One, by half-assing all of the things, or by doing a quality job on 1 or 2 and dropping others, or, a balance of that, which is saying, okay, this anatomy thing is sort of the most important, both for doing well on exams and also for like what I want to know this week in med school, because I find it interesting. And so I'm going to give myself like 3 hours to do that. Whereas this like assignment for school that I know could take me a long time, like these like little write-ups we would do on diseases first year of medical school. The first few weeks, I just spent way too much time on them. And then I realized, oh, these are sort of just not that important. And if I could just, so for those things, I would say, okay, I'm going to do just a really poor job for my standards. And that hurt because I was submitting it and people were reading it. And I was like, oh man, they're going to think I'm so stupid. But I just set myself a time limit. I was like, okay, I get 45 minutes to do this. I was taking 3 hours before. I was like, I get 45 minutes to do this. It's going to be bad. Might not even be completely done. And then that's that. And then also having the things where like, when I'm, say it's a Saturday and I know I have like a series of like big chunk things I have to do, like research or like studying for an exam or all, you know, the number of things you might have on your to-do list. And when I start to feel stressed, say it's 5 p.m., it's getting dark, I'm like, oh no, the weekend's almost over, or let's call this a Sunday because I always get the Sunday scaries. Then I would say, okay, instead of just like chugging through and being like, I must get all this done, I'm just going to like force feed it into my brain and body. I will pause, take a step back, look at my to-do list and be like, what can I cross off? Or what can I postpone till next week? Or what can I let go of? And just remembering that when it feels like you are like literally trudging through mud to take a step back and like throw some water on it, or whatever analogy you want to use.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Something that I would add is the nice thing about medical school is we would have like, we don't have semesters or quarters, but we had these like blocks and they would be like extended periods of time. You'd be covering one subject and we only had one exam at the end that really counted for anything. Yeah, we had like a little midterm exam, but it was just kind of more of a self-assessment. We had quizzes every week, but again, they were more assessments of your own knowledge and seeing like, are you keeping up with the material? Where are your deficits? What do you need to work on? But only the last one really mattered. And I think going off what everybody's mentioned, everything takes longer than you anticipate. So like if it's going to be double that or whatever, that's fine. It's going to happen. But like if you know the target is 10 weeks from now, don't crush yourself tonight, staying up all the way until like 1 o'clock in the morning, trying to finish everything on your to-do list, because what, you're going to wake up in the morning tired and then you're going to go to lecture. You're not going to go to lecture and then you're going to start falling behind. And then it's a snowball. And then it kind of just breeds more stress and anxiety and more procrastination and all these sort of things. Right. So knowing when to kind of like quit and like either pick out like the priority things to do, or knowing when to like kind of put your hands up and like, all right, you know, this, I don't need to really know everything today. I can figure it out kind of later on. That's really important. And I would also say, going back to my whole scheduling thing, is scheduling in like these makeup days of like, all right, sure, I have everything I want to do every single day and try to stay on top of it, knowing that that's not going to happen. It's not realistic that I'm always going to be on top of everything. But then I'd leave like, okay, Saturday, I don't have anything scheduled. That's my kind of like, let me catch up on stuff that I didn't cross off the list throughout the week that I want to either review or finish up or wrap up on. And having those like catch up days are really great, because it is impossible to like schedule everything perfectly, and you shouldn't fill up every moment of your waking time, studying and working really hard. You should have those like kind of wiggle rooms as well.
So yeah, 2 quick points I want to make. One is, as others have echoed, the theme is like, don't guilt trip yourself when, you don't accomplish a certain task on your task list. Like it's going to be, you're going to feel worse after guilt tripping yourself. And then when you're in that like heightened state of anxiety, you're probably going to be, it's probably going to be more counterproductive than productive. And so just like forgiving yourself when you can't accomplish something is really important. I know we all have the compulsion to like blame ourselves that we could have done better and to like expect more from ourselves. But I think being kind, like forgiving yourself, is probably one of the most important things I've learned for mental health. And just a minor point also, as Nana said, things always take much longer than you expect them to. So just like be wise, budget more time than you think you'll need. Just as someone who can like foresee the future, right? Or foresee your own future. And another thing I wanted to mention is I think there's certain things, especially in med school, that are relatively high yield to front load. As in, for example, like at least for me, understanding like the basic pathophysiology of all the major diseases and how they interrelated with one another, and then having that like skeleton to build upon at a later time. So like basically like when I learn a disease, I learn the pathophysiology really well. And then when the mention of that disease comes up later again, then I can fill in like little pieces of details onto the skeleton I already have. And that makes understanding so much more profound, and it makes your practically allows you to retain the memory for a longer time. So like understanding rather than just like pure memorizing. And I think that's like the front load investment that I made that I think was really worthwhile. Something that's just an example, but there are other like high yield, like front loading investments that I think you should be doing. Another example is like some people, like there are a shit ton of things to memorize in medical school, and there are a lot of memory techniques. One of which is like a memory palace technique, which I won't delve into details right now. But you know, if you learn how to learn how to memorize things, like early in med school rather than later when you're like in crunch time, then I think it's going to pay off later on.
So I think that is our final question for this evening. Thank you all so much for serving on this panel, sharing your own stories about mental health and so many great techniques for how to prioritize your mental health. I hope for anyone watching this panel, you know that like your mental health is so much more important than your grades or what others think of you. Like, you have to put yourself first. And if you're pre-med and wanting to be a physician, in order to care for other patients, you also have to care for yourself. So I hope that you were able to learn a lot through this panel and just understand that like it's okay to talk about your mental health and seek help for it. Finally, I think we're going to I'm going to read in the chat. You can follow at MedMentors UCLA for more student panels and resources. And you can look on the pre-health website for more pre-health information, prehealth.ucla.edu. Thank you so much, everyone, again, and have a great evening.